None, I said, steady as glass. The word tasted like rust, but I didn't blink. The CTO had just asked in front of the entire leadership offsite what kind of stock package I was sitting on. I told the truth. One syllable. No emotion. But the silence that followed was louder than any laugh. He gave this half smirk, the kind you reserve for people who still bring paper maps to a GPS meeting, and said, "Well, let's fix that discrepancy, huh?" A few board members chuckled. Someone clinked a glass. And just like that, the room moved on. I didn't. See, people think power announces itself with title slides and leather chairs. But real power's quieter. It clicks shut in folders. It timestamps emails. It waits. I slid the beat-up manila folder back into my bag, top tab, exhibits, personal. No one asked. They never do. Before we go on, real quick, if this story already has you side-eyeing your own HR files, do me a favor. Tap subscribe and hit like. It's free, but it tells the algorithm this is worth something. And honestly, that tiny click helps more than you think. Thank you. Anyway, back to the room. I knew I was already marked. The new CTO didn't even bother hiding it. Fresh from a Series D darling, all slick hair and flippant brilliance, he'd walked in 2 months ago and asked if our core architecture was grandma-proof. I'm the one who built it. He said it with a grin, like a punchline only he found funny. I logged it, along with everything else. So when he circled back to the board Q&A saying something about equity holders driving innovation, I saw the setup before the question left his mouth. I answered plainly, none. Not yet. Not hoping to, just the truth. And in that moment, I watched him write me off in real time. I wasn't a stakeholder. I was a placeholder. The truth is, I'd asked for equity. Twice. Once after our second patent approval, once after the product hit 100K users. Both times, the CFO smiled like I was asking for sprinkles on a filet mignon. Said we could revisit at the right milestone. Then they promoted 2 guys whose biggest contribution was breaking the CI pipeline for a week straight. But it was fine. I wasn't here to decorate the org chart. I was here to build. And what I built, I kept receipts on. What they didn't know, what no one in that damned lakeside conference room knew, was that none didn't mean nothing. My options weren't shares. They were patents. 12 of them. Quietly filed. Methodically structured. Tied not to the company, but to me. My name, my clauses, my fallback if I ever became, in their words, redundant. And I could already feel it happening. The shift. The silence when I entered a room. The way my roadmap presentations got shortened, then skipped. The way my Slack DMs got colder, like I'd caught a professional disease. The symptoms were all there. This wasn't my first layoff dance. But what they didn't understand is I'd been choreographing my own steps. That day after the Q&A, I went back to my hotel room, locked the door, and opened my personal laptop. Pulled up the folder labeled Clean Transfer Drafts. Scanned the 12 patents, all filed through my own counsel. All housed under my little Delaware LLC, benign name, nothing flashy, and each with the same escape hatch clause. License terminates if I'm let go without cause. Ownership reverts to me. No approval needed, just a form and a clock. The CTO thought he was the only one who understood leverage. He thought stock was the only kind of stake that mattered. But stock is a vote. Patents are a voice. And mine were about to get very, very loud. They scheduled the realignment meeting for 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday. That's how you know it's personal. Friday layoffs are for spreadsheets. Thursday afternoons are for theater. I walked in with my laptop, a legal pad, and exactly 0 illusions. The HR director was already in the room. She gave me a pity smile like I'd dropped my ice cream cone. The CTO, of course, was mysteriously caught in another meeting. I didn't bother asking who else had been cut. When they call it a realignment, what they mean is, we pushed you out and gave the guy with the podcast a raise. They read from a script, soft and paper thin. This has nothing to do with your performance, they said, which is code for, this has everything to do with optics. I nodded, even smiled. I signed their little goodbye letter with the pen I'd brought myself, because I don't trust borrowed ink for moments like these. Then I opened my bag, took out a single envelope, certified mail already prepped, and slid it across the table to the in-house counsel like I was tipping a waiter. Per Section 7, I said, voice even. This constitutes formal notice of license reversion review. You have 14 days. They blinked. It took a full beat for them to realize I wasn't talking about the severance agreement. Counsel reached for the envelope like it was radioactive. HR just stared. That's the moment I realized they truly had no clue what they'd just stepped on. It wasn't ego. I wasn't the only person in the company with ideas. But I was the only one who'd taken those ideas, diagrammed them, formalized them, filed them, and locked them in language that even the CEO's golfing buddy lawyer couldn't unwind in under 2 weeks. Then came the box. Standard issue. Cardboard. Pre-creased with a white sticker on the side reading Exit Kit. I think someone in operations thought that made it more humane. HR gestured to it like it was a warm blanket. I filled it slowly. Keyboard, mouse. 2 books they never read, but always complimented. I left the team photo on the desk. That was a lie I didn't need to carry out the door. They walked me out through the side exit, like a delivery. No one from engineering looked up, except Carl, the junior front-end dev, who mouthed, "What?" as I passed. I didn't answer, just kept walking. Out in the parking lot, the wind bit sharp and clean. The sky was the kind of clear that feels like an insult. I put the box in my trunk, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the building for a full minute. Not in mourning, not even in anger, just logging the moment like a timestamp. Then I opened my phone and pinged my attorney. Go time, all 12. She replied with a thumbs up and a single line, already drafting transfers to the LLC. I drove away without music, just the soft thunk of tires over the speed bumps they put in after one too many late-night accidents. That building behind me, it didn't own what it thought it did. Not anymore. In 14 days, the licenses they'd built entire roadmaps on would revert to me. They'd terminated me with a generic clause and a cardboard box. What they triggered, without even knowing, was a legal countdown. The patents were about to come home. The morning after they walked me out, I brewed my coffee slow, not for comfort, out of ritual. Ritual means control. And right now, control was the only currency I still had in surplus. I didn't let myself spiral. No sad playlists, no open-ended journal entries, just a checklist. And at the top, transfer. I opened the secured drive and scrolled through the patent titles, each one like a scar I'd earned the hard way. 12 total. 11 methods, 1 system architecture, filed over 3 years. Independently, surgically, obsessively documented. All assigned to me under provisional license agreements tied to my employment, with one very specific clause built into each. Upon termination without cause, primary rights revert in full within 14 business days. No appeal, no renegotiation, just a clean snap. My LLC, Parallax Formations, registered in Delaware, masked through a trustee for privacy, was always the fallback. Just a simple little container, like a fireproof safe no one knew was sitting beneath the floorboards. At 9:47 a.m., I opened the template transfer forms. At 10:06, every single one was signed and time-stamped. The filings auto-forwarded to my attorney, who initiated the change of record with the USPTO. Control, consolidated, ownership, moved, just like that. Next, notifications. You learn quickly in this game that silence isn't protection. It's negligence. So I drafted the notice emails to all prior licensees. Not many. A few third-party partners. A couple enterprise clients who'd negotiated limited-use clauses tied to shared projects. I kept it polite, clean, surgical. Dear name, please be advised that, as of date, primary ownership and licensing authority for patents list has transferred from company to Parallax Formations, LLC. All active agreements remain in place under their existing terms, pending standard review under reversion clauses. For new licensing or renewal discussions, please contact licensing@parallaxformations.com. Respectfully, my full name. That email signature hit different now. Then I changed the autoresponder on my personal site. Before, it was just a standard "thanks for reaching out." Now, for all patent licensing, partnership, or technical inquiries, please contact licensing@parallaxformations.com. This email is no longer affiliated with company. No drama, just a wall drawn in fine permanent ink. By 2 p.m., my inbox was already stirring. A licensing officer from a regional platform asked if the reversion applied to the UI compression method they'd embedded. It did. A compliance lead from a medical SaaS startup I barely remembered sent a confused question. "Wait, do we owe someone else now?" I replied once, short and friendly, and forwarded the rest to my counsel. Meanwhile, my old company hadn't even flinched. No LinkedIn updates, no internal bulletins. They still thought they'd removed a name from a payroll line. What they'd done was trigger a breach window across their entire product suite. The architecture they built had been modular, my choice. Easier to license, easier to unhook. Every time I clicked send, I felt something uncoil. Grief didn't get a seat at this table. It showed up, sure, knocking with its usual speeches about loyalty and wasted time. But I was too busy sending certified PDFs to let it in. The chessboard had tilted, and for once, I wasn't the pawn. I was the rule they'd forgotten existed. 12 pieces. One board. Check had just been announced. I didn't want to build a shrine. I wanted to build a mirror, something so clean, so undeniable that when people looked at it, they'd have no choice but to see whose fingerprints were all over their work. So I built the library. No branding, no fluff, just code. Modular, elegant, deeply annotated. Every method, every system architecture component rewritten from scratch based on the same foundational principles as the patents now housed under Parallax. I used clear file names, simple API calls, and most importantly, documentation that actually taught, not just listed. My old company used to bury logic in business jargon. I stripped that out like rot. By week's end, it was live on GitLab under a fair use license. MIT inspired, but with one clause that couldn't be overlooked. Attribution must be visible to end users in either the footer, about panel, or equivalent persistent element. Removal or obfuscation constitutes license termination. I didn't bury it in fine print. It was line 3. You couldn't miss it unless you were trying to, and anyone who did try would hit the failsafe. A single test method in the shared repo that checked for attribution. Fail it, and your build would throw a silent warning flag. QA engineers would catch it before it ever made it to production. I made sure of it. The library itself? I called it Plainform, a nod to what the original platform was supposed to be before marketing got a hold of it. I spent 4 straight nights getting it right. Not perfect, just bulletproof. Function first, human readable. The kind of tool I would have killed for 10 years ago when I was still debugging 3 a.m. builds solo. I didn't announce it. I just pushed it and pinged 3 open source devs I respected, none of whom had any ties to my old company. Within 48 hours, one of them forked it and tweeted, "This library feels like someone finally read the manuals we never got." That was the first crack. The second came when a small Canadian fintech app quietly pushed a beta with Plainform modules embedded. Their About panel, powered in part by Plainform, attribution, my name, Parallax formations. Clean, respectful, legal, and effective. Because what I'd built, it worked. Better than what I left behind. Faster render times, lighter load. And unlike my former employer's spaghetti pile, this was a blueprint anyone could follow, because I wanted it that way. I didn't care who used it, just that they gave credit where credit was due. Over the next few days, clone stars ticked up. Not viral, just persistent, steady. The way reputation actually spreads, through usefulness, not noise. Some of the forks added tweaks and modules. Fine by me. That was the point. But every single one, thanks to that one immovable license clause, carried my name somewhere small, somewhere quiet, where end users could see it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't glory. It was infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't beg to be noticed. It just refuses to be ignored. My old company had gatekept for years, treating architecture like a kingdom, hoarding access and stamping every page with their watermark. I built a road, paved it smooth, lined it with working lights, and at the end of it, I left a single sign, Plainform, by my name, attribution required. They built walls. I left the door open. And the market? It knows how to walk through. The first time I saw it, I laughed so hard I had to set my coffee down. A screenshot, grainy but clear, circulating in a dev Slack I still had eyes on through an old side email. It was a beta release from Rindle, one of our loudest competitors, their shiny new UI, sleek as ever. And down at the very bottom, right where your eye lands just before you close the tab, powered by my name, licensed via Plainform. In gray text, small but not small enough. They hadn't customized it, not even a little, which told me two things. One, they were moving fast, and two, they didn't have time to build their own system. That meant urgency. That meant adoption. That meant momentum was already slipping from the hands of the people who'd fired me and straight into mine. By the end of the week, the repo had 470 stars, forked 112 times. 10 separate threads opened with titles like Integration Tips and Best Practices for Attribution Placement. The second one cracked me up. It used the exact language I'd proposed in our product design review 6 months prior, the one the CTO dismissed with a casual, "That's too academic." Now, devs were copy-pasting it into production with the reverence of gospel. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I lurked the issue threads, watched names I recognized, some who'd never responded to my DMs, debating performance deltas and config options like I hadn't spent the last year begging for a build freeze to fix that very thing. They were quoting me, verbatim, without knowing it. My old diagrams, stripped of logos, were getting ported into Notion docs and Figma boards at startups I'd never spoken to. It was like watching ghosts reenact your past life, only this time you weren't being talked over. One thread in particular stuck with me. A DevOps engineer from a Brazilian analytics firm wrote, "Finally, someone documented this the way real engineers think." He didn't know who I was. Didn't care, but that comment hit harder than any peer review I ever got from my old team. Meanwhile, back at my former employer, the silence was deafening. No counter release, no smug Medium post, not even a bug fix announcement, which told me exactly what I needed to know. They saw it, and they didn't have an answer. Because here's the truth. Most companies aren't agile. They're scared of moving too fast, too loud, too far from the plan. I was no longer their plan. And now the plan was slipping away. I got a ping from a recruiter at a firm that used to poach from us like vultures. The message was polite, friendly, too friendly. "We're exploring some integrations and noticed your name on quite a few builds. Would love to connect." Translation: "You have leverage now. Can we buy it off you?" I declined, because this wasn't about cash, not anymore. It was about visibility. That attribution line, silent, humble, low res, was doing the work of 1,000 resumes, not just in one app, not even in one market, but everywhere. Health tech, edu platforms. Hell, even a climate data NGO had dropped Plainform into their mobile site and included my name in the onboarding splash screen. The CTO once told me, "Real architecture is invisible." I used to believe him, until I realized that invisibility was just what people like him relied on to steal credit. Well, not anymore. My work was visible now, in footers, in menus, in metadata, and for once, no one could talk over it. No one could push it into a Jira backlog and forget it existed. They built a system to forget me. I built one that remembered itself. They thought they could sneak it in. 2 weeks after Plainform started showing up in competitor betas, I caught wind that my old company, let's call them Virex, had quietly folded sections of it into their new modular rewrite. No press, no changelog mentions. Just buried commits with obfuscated variable names and my attribution line stripped clean. They didn't even fork it. They copied it. Whole files, line for line, and then they did what they always do. Rewrote just enough to pretend it was original, but code has fingerprints, logic has rhythm, and QA has rules. I wouldn't have even noticed if not for an anonymous pull request on the Plainform repo, someone asking if the core modules were meant to throw a fail flag when attribution was missing. The language was careful, too careful. I traced the user to an IP block linked to Virex's offshore QA partner. Sloppy. Turns out, my license checker did exactly what I built it to do. When they tried to integrate the stripped version into their build pipeline, the validator tripped. Internal QA flagged it. Because even outside companies know what their own risk profile looks like. And this wasn't just risk, it was theft. Wearing a trench coat made of arrogance. The internal scramble must have been magnificent. A day later, a former engineering manager, one of the decent ones, texted me, just a screenshot, an internal Slack message from their QA lead, blocking launch, license non-compliance, attribution clause hit. No emoji, no reaction, just a hard stop. The next blow came quieter, but deeper. Their largest enterprise client paused renewal. Not canceled, not yet. Just seeking clarification on IP integrity. A polite way of saying, prove this is yours or we walk. And then came the kill shot. Their liability insurer sent a formal request. Please confirm current patent ownership and active licensing rights for components listed in Appendix B. Documentation must be delivered within 48 hours to maintain coverage. Appendix B was nearly all mine. No response meant policy lapse. And without coverage, Virex couldn't ship. Their CTO could swagger all he wanted on earnings calls, but without insurance, a single IP claim could crater them. And suddenly, I wasn't just a former employee. I was the only person who could put out the fire they lit. But I didn't gloat. I didn't send a taunting email or schedule a smug Zoom. I just waited, kept every email, every timestamp, every commit hash. My folders were clean, my records airtight. This wasn't revenge, it was bookkeeping. The last thing they expected from me was quiet control. That's why it worked. While they panicked in boardrooms and passed around redacted PDFs, I did nothing. Just refreshed my inbox, watched the clock, and let the squeeze do its work. Because here's the thing. You can't run fast and hide footprints at the same time. And the second they tried to erase me, they stopped moving forward. That's what happens when your innovation depends on a name you tried to delete. Turns out, stripping attribution strips more than a footer. It strips stability, it strips coverage, it strips trust. And all I had to do was let the license do what licenses do. The email came in at 6:12 a.m., subject line, request for urgent discussion, IP clarification. No greeting, just a meeting link and a block of names that looked like someone had dumped the entire Virex leadership tree into Outlook and hit send. The kind of list you only use when legal's pacing and someone in finance is whispering the word exposure. I poured my coffee, took my time. At 6:27, I clicked the link. 7 faces stared back at me, puffy-eyed, over-caffeinated, and trying way too hard not to look desperate. The CTO was there, of course, jaw set like he was chewing gravel. Legal, compliance, insurance liaison, and 2 board members I hadn't seen since the last roadmap review they ignored. Thank you for joining. Legal started, too polite. We're hoping to resolve a few licensing questions directly. I let the silence stretch until it got awkward. Then, sure, I said. Let's talk terms. They danced around it at first, obfuscating language. Harmonization of assets. Long-term alignment. I've seen toddlers negotiate with more grace. Eventually, one of the board members, Conrad, I think, cut the crap. Look, he said, we'd like to discuss an exclusive relicensing agreement, something that protects both parties and restores predictability, with attribution optional. I didn't laugh, didn't blink. Just opened the folder on my desktop and double-clicked the PDF labeled gatekeeper.termsheet.final.pdf. It was 1 page. No fluff, just lines. Cross-license agreement offer. Non-exclusive access to patents. Listed for internal and commercial use. Attribution mandatory, visible footer or about screen. Unmodifiable backdated royalty structure, starting from termination date. Audit rights retained by licensor agreement, non-transferable without prior approval. Term. Perpetual, unless terminated by violation. I screen shared it. Let them read it. Let them choke on the simplicity. The CTO leaned forward. We're offering exclusivity. I shook my head. You don't have that kind of leverage anymore. The market's already moved. Rindle's shipping with my footer. So is Yarrow. So is Leapspan. The industry chose attribution over erasure. I'm just formalizing it. He bristled. We can negotiate that clause. No, I said. You had your chance to negotiate before you stripped the attribution and triggered a coverage review. This isn't a takedown. It's a toll booth. The insurance rep unmuted, voice strained. We'd recommend signing her offer as is. And there it was, the moment. I wasn't the problem anymore. I was the solution they couldn't launch without. The CFO, silent until now, finally spoke. Are you open to revisiting rates down the line? I shrugged. Sure, if your volume justifies it. But right now, you're 2 weeks into backdated royalties and 7 days from a full policy lapse. This is the bridge. Walk it or don't. They all stared at the screen. That one-pager glowed like scripture. I muted myself. Let them stew. This wasn't vengeance. I didn't need to crush them. I just needed them to say it out loud. We need you. We see you. You built this. And now, if they wanted to keep building, they'd have to pay the toll. Footnote included. Revenue froze before the frostbite registered. 3 of Virex's biggest accounts, all of them legacy, flagged their Q4 renewals for review. No escalation, no tantrums. Just polite corporate dread disguised as delay. And that's what made it dangerous. Nobody panics when a client yells. But when they go quiet, that's blood in the water. Meanwhile, LeapSpan launched their public beta, front page of Product Hunt. Smooth, snappy, with performance benchmarks Virex used to brag about before they gutted the team that made them possible. And there it was, clear as daylight in their About panel, powered in part by Plainform. Attribution, my name, Parallax Formations, LLC. Small, gray, unmissable. The same week, Rindle pushed a major update and added a new section to their investor deck. Infrastructure stability through open licensing. Slide 6, screenshots with my name at the bottom of 2 modules. Virex's board didn't need a pie chart to connect the dots. Competitors were shipping. Clients were stalling. Legal was sweating. And that PDF I sent? Still unsigned, still sitting in someone's to-review folder while their internal compliance logs quietly filled with red flags. Internally, they called it the gap. The window between when their last deploy was rolled back and when the next one could pass QA. But nobody wanted to admit what it really was. A vacuum. Of leadership. Of architecture. Of options. I heard from someone on the inside, anonymously, through a back channel, that engineering was throttled. Features were finished but couldn't be released, not without risking exposure, not without license coverage, not without me. And now investors were asking questions, the kind with teeth. Why does your competitor's footer have her name? Is your IP defensible? Why did you remove the attribution clause? On a Friday afternoon call, the CTO tried to save face. We're negotiating. We won't be strong-armed into permanent credit lines just because... That's when counsel cut in. Quiet voice, no camera, just audio, like a ghost in the room. We have to sign her paper. 3 seconds of dead silence. And just like that, the room shifted. Not outwardly, but internally, you could feel it, like pressure dropping before a storm. Everyone saw what it meant. The debate was over, not because they agreed, but because the math had turned. Attrition over attribution was no longer a strategy. It was a loss. I didn't celebrate. I didn't crack a grin or pour a drink or send a smirking emoji to anyone. I just opened the PDF again, made sure the date still aligned, and left it untouched. No edits, no sweeteners, no ego. Because what mattered wasn't the signature. It was the shift. The tremor that had lived in my hands for months, the one that started the day they boxed up my desk, had stopped. Not because they apologized, but because they couldn't move without me. They thought they'd written me out. Turns out I was the code that wouldn't compile without attribution. And now they knew it too. The official investor update was scheduled for 10 watts a.m., but I knew they'd start late. These things always do. Too many suits trying to squeeze optimism into a quarterly slide deck padded with half-finished roadmaps and delays framed as pivots. I didn't dial in. Didn't need to. Word would find its way to me eventually. And it did. At 10:47 on the dot, via a forwarded transcript from someone who still believed in right and wrong. The line came halfway through the call, quiet but unmistakable. No dramatic pause, no forced apology. She owns the claims, counsel said. 3 words. Dry, clinical, devastating. You could feel the recalibration ripple through the audio, projected revenue forecasts crumbling in the background, shareholder optimism deflating behind practiced smiles. The CTO didn't speak. He couldn't. Not after doubling down for weeks on containment. Not after the insurers demanded proof and got silence. I'd already countersigned the agreement hours earlier. My terms didn't change. Non-exclusive cross-license, attribution permanent, visible, non-negotiable, royalties backdated to my termination date, audit rights for all current and future builds. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. They submitted to the same license as everyone else. No backdoors, no exclusivity, no sweetheart red lines. Just the cold logic of legal cause and consequence. The same people who had laughed when I said I had no stock now looped in legal to analyze every word of my clauses. I didn't have options. I had ownership. Later that day, the update email hit my inbox. A mass announcement from Virex's communications team. Spin, as expected. Excited to partner with independent creators. Strengthening our IP foundation. Not a single mention of my name, but the attachment told the real story. Plainform's license terms, signed, effective immediately. I didn't respond. I didn't share it. I just archived the message and got on with my day. Around sunset, I took the long way home. It wasn't intentional. Muscle memory, maybe. My car crept up to that stretch of office parks I used to know so well. The old building came into view, still sterile, still lifeless. I didn't look up. Didn't slow down, just rolled past the parking lot where I once spent 10 minutes crying into a steering wheel the day they stole credit for my build. At home, I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a drink, and opened my tablet. 3 apps, competitors, former allies, upstarts, all shipping features powered by Plainform. I tapped through the menus, scrolled to the footers. There it was. Powered by Plainform. Attribution, my name, parallax formations. On one, it was in a footer bar. On another, tucked into the About screen. On the third, proudly center-aligned in the credits page, right above the dev team. Small, permanent, unavoidable. That's the thing about ownership. It doesn't ask for applause. It just waits. Until the people who dismissed you have no choice but to cite you. Until the story they tried to rewrite ends up with your name at the bottom of every page. They measured me in options. The market measured me in signatures, and it wrote mine in every footer.